Well, welcome everyone. We're back for session two, and it's my pleasure to welcome you back. Every day, every morning, you have to wake up and ask yourself, as a leader, how will I lead today? And we have one of those rare opportunities to pull together some of the top leaders in the industry and hear from them in terms of how they're leading their organizations and how they respond to this pandemic. So we're very fortunate to have Rich Wilson, the CEO of Paul Davis Restoration, very fortunate to have Dan Cassara, CEO of Core Group, very fortunate to have Marc Springer, CEO of Dayspring Restoration, as also serves as the president of the Restoration Industry Association. So let's kick things off just with an opening question to each of the panelists. And so the question to each of you, and let's start with yourself, Rich, and then we'll move to Dan and then to Marc.
Sure.
The question is, as a leader of your organization, how are you responding to the challenges posed by this pandemic? Rich, let's start with you.
Sure. So four things that I could share that I think are taking traction. There's one, engagement with our network. We have a network of 315 offices in the U.S. and Canada. And I'll talk more about each one. Education during this strange time. Short-term planning financially. And then maybe an unexpected one would be how do we still have fun doing what we're doing? So on the engagement side, first, we've got some really, really great leaders in our network that are either franchisees or GMs of company owned. And we are probably on the phone collaborating on different subjects, getting their feedback and making sure this isn't a top-down response. So we are really engaging that way. For the rest of the network, I give a regular CEO address by video. That's why I have this silly background, but it just makes it easy for me because I spend all my life on Zoom right now. We have webinars daily on different topics that our franchisees can join. And I think the most important thing is that I don't think I've talked to as many offices probably in my career in a week. Meaning I just pick up the phone, not necessarily scheduled, and just check in with people because people are reacting to this, as we all know, in many different ways. So that's the engagement part. In terms of education, we really need to educate, especially our less sophisticated offices, on financial discipline and making good decisions. And also the opportunity, whether it's building relationships with cleaning or just reaching out to our insurance partners to make sure we're still getting claims. So the education is part of that webinar thing. Short-term planning, I got to tell you, if you would have asked me 2 months ago what we were going to do in sales and profit for the overall network, I would have told you probably with certainty. Right now, I have no idea. Right now, I'm worried about our April close. I still haven't gotten that quite done yet, and now I'm worried about May and June. So we're trying to be realistic on what we're trending and predicting. It was for March, April, and May. We beat March. I think we're going to beat April. No idea about May, and that's why I'm having a hard time understanding where we're going to end up at the end of the year. So it's really, for the first time in my career, I'm really focused more on short-term planning than I am on long-term planning. And I'll just, in terms of the fun thing, people are stuck at home with their kids. A lot of us are working, but there's still many people aren't in the office. So I try to make sure that we're having some fun. Like, for example, we had a Matterport scavenger hunt, which I thought was cool, right? I mean, it's probably not a new idea, but it was new to me. I thought, yeah, that sounds like fun. And then we had to cancel our conference, which usually we get 1,000 people. We were going to be in San Antonio, up the road from you, Dan. Or up or over. And so what I'm going to do, I'm actually going to do a live awards ceremony on May 15th, and I'm actually going to wear a tux.
Wow.
And we want as many people to come as possible. So we just want to have some fun. So I heard a quote, I'll close with this. I heard a quote that how we lead as leaders in the next 5 weeks will determine how we are remembered in the next 10 years. And that really hit me. That was on some webinar that I was in outside of Paul Davis. And because we are still open, and we found this new offering of disinfecting, we are uniquely qualified to get stronger during this. So, my message has been, we're going to emerge out of this chaos or crisis, whatever you want to call it, a stronger company. So that's my quick summary.
Great. Thanks, Rich. And, I made lots of notes. I'd love to come back to some of that. But I want to give the microphone over to you, Dan. Dan, as the leader of Core Group, how are you responding? What does leadership look like in your world right now?
So similarly to what Rich said, we are facing some of the same challenges. We have a slightly different business model than Rich's. So we are not a traditional franchise model, so it poses its own set of challenges. What was kind of interesting about this situation is that what most people don't realize, and I always have been very transparent about this, what most people don't realize when you're in a position of leadership, that they don't necessarily hold space for you as a human being to go through this with them, And so, interestingly enough, the first thing I will say is, it was, I think, the one of the resounding times that I realized that I was so incredibly proud to be a part of an industry that was not only not fearful of this, but really took the bull by the horns and said, we can get through this because we're accustomed to dealing with this sort of thing every day. And so on a personal level, it makes you feel really great to know, okay, I'm surrounded by the right company. I'm in the right space. What most people don't, get to experience when you're in a position of leadership is how it's affecting your personal life. And, for me personally, I've got friends and family that are in retail and, restaurants and other things. My family business is over 60 years old and it's in retail and it's completely shut down right now and has been for a couple of months. So I look at those challenges and then have to, align them against what we're dealing with at Core. Now, Core is doing well. And so that's all great and everything. But the thing that really was different for me is I took a very personal approach with our team first internally. And I realized very quickly that everyone on my team was going through the same thing I was going through. And that I needed to be really real with them on the fact that, there's going to be some bumps. It's going to be an interesting, wave that we're going to ride here. I don't know how it's going to look in the end, but as long as you're willing to stay on the boat, we'll make it through. And I made it a point to check in with my team on a regular basis. And I actually, funny enough, I check in with them more now than ever before. I think it's made us a much stronger team. I'm now doing what Rich is doing, and I've now reaching out to our members and our franchisees to see how they're doing. But I do check in with them, electronically already. But really just keeping a pulse on how this is impacting the overall team, I think was really important for me, because that would then tell me how to react next in terms of, our projected claim volume and all of that, that all of these things across the industry have been totally impacted naturally. But for in the initial set, it was really important for me to really lead with my heart and not just with what the book told me to do. And so that was really, really important. And that's how I've been personally. And I think now more than ever, it was just more reason to do that. And so that was really important to me.
I think that's a really transparent and honest response, Dan. And I just want to highlight, that point you made. You said, I'm being honest about all of this with my team because, they're looking to you. And I want to circle back to that comment about how, you as the leader, how are you staying healthy? So thanks for that, Dan. I want to go to Marc, and then we're going to open it up to Q&A. So just a message to those viewers in the chat discussion there on the stream. This is the time to start kind of throwing down some questions. My request is keep them concise, keep them on topic. We really want to talk about the topic of leadership and leading your organization. But Marc, I want to go to you. Marc, same question. I was wondering, Marc, if I could maybe just give you a little more airspace because you're leading in two organizations. You have a very successful restoration company in Montana, but also you're the president of the industry association, the Restoration Industry Association. What does it look like right now as a leader to be responding in both those hats that you're wearing?
Yeah. So yeah, I was trying to think about how do I bifurcate these two. And first of all, Leighton, thanks for inviting me. It's impressive to be, for me, on a panel with guys like this. I was worried about being last, though, because I thought, what in the world am I going to say after Rich and Dan? You know, I'm out of my league. You know, I'm a small, relatively small entrepreneur out in Montana. Our company, I probably have a lot in common with a lot of the restoration companies that are on this call today. We have 6 branches across Montana. Montana is a great place to be right now. Unfortunately, everyone wants to be in Montana because we have very little density in Montana, which means that the number of cases we have of COVID in Montana is very low. We have less than 500 cases in the whole state and less than 20 deaths so far. So I'm thankful that I get to do what I do in a business that is, you know, has this certain amount of, you know, what the governor of Montana said, we don't consider day spring restoration to be an essential business. We consider them to be a critical business. So, you know, it's awesome to have a business that we can continue to operate. But in the midst of all that, it's still scary times that we're in. There's a lot of fear. I mean, like a lot of, again, private people on this call right now, I mean, we have our whole livelihood tied to this business that we built over 30 years. I mean, I've got personal guarantees all over the place. I got a lot of people that look to us for their livelihoods. And it's a different fear. The fears I've faced over the last 8 weeks, let's say, are probably different than a lot of the people who work for me, who their biggest fear is, I don't want to get COVID. I'm personally, that's not a fear of mine, but I'm worried about the business. I mean, we were talking about claim volume before we got on here. I mean, claim volume was scary in the month of April. But I think as leaders, we've had to face the reality in this crisis of how do we manage our fear in the midst of this? And, you know, I think it was, you know, John Wayne or some, you know, person who probably, you know, I don't know that they're an expert on courage or not, but the quote was something along the lines of, you know, courage is being scared spitless and saddling up anyway. So it's not us working in the midst of the fears that we face. It's us saying, okay, I'm scared, but here's how we're going to take decisive action. And that really gets to the first point. And I'm going to say in both arenas, both with RIA and with Day Spring Restoration, one of the most important things for us has been communication, and communicating in a way that is honest, communicating in a way that is, you know, transparent. So they're a little different between honest and transparent. And I've told our folks on the call, I said, listen, guys, you have fears. We do a Zoom call with our entire organization, all 130 people across Montana. And I told them, I said, guys, listen, that I have fears in the midst of this right now, but how we manage these fears, and this is the plan we are going to operate according to, and you have my word, you have my commitment that we are going to keep you informed about this as we go through, and consider me a resource as we move through it. So this is kind of a silver lining for us, is that in the midst of all this that we're facing, our communication has ramped up, I think just like Dan and Rich were saying, exponentially. Not only with our entire organization, but also with the leadership team. Our leadership team meets every single day to work through the most critical things that we face in the business on any given day. And I think along the lines of what Rich talked about, you know, right now, focusing on our cash and the solvency of our accounts receivable is huge. In our industry, we deal with things that are unique as it relates to our accounts receivable. I mean, the insurance company saying, yeah, checks in the mail. Well, there's some different dynamics right now that we face about the solvency of our customers. And so we became laser focused on our accounts receivable and our cash flow. Our CFO is a very conservative, very disciplined veteran of finance. And fortunately, the sound principles we've taken over the years have paid huge dividends. Because we were able to go into this crisis with strong cash reserves and strong financial practices in place already that I believe will enable us to weather this storm. But that does not take away from the laser focus we've had to put on cash flow and put on our cash in general. So communication would be number one. Number two thing would be really our processes and our policies. a lot of our policies that we have in our organization had to frankly just be thrown out and reevaluated. I mean, we had to completely overhaul a lot of our HR policies, especially all sorts of new state and federal practices have come into place, and we communicate about that with our team in real time to let them know, here's this piece that is available. Folks, bear with us. We're doing the best we can to interpret this. Here's what we're doing today, and then we're posting those things on our HR platform so people can see it, they can interact with it, they can ask questions, and deal with that, more or less in real time. But we've had to be very flexible, and we have a lot of people on our team who their kids are out of school now, and they've got to work from home now. And that's tough. How do we accommodate that? What if they have an accident at home? Is that a work comp injury or not? So there's all these things we grapple with now that we've never had to grapple with before, but it requires very intentional and frequent communication. And those have really been keys for us getting through this. Just kind of changing hats over to the RIA front. Same things there, although a bit different. There's so many people I respect and I look up to that I just don't want to let them down in this crisis now. And our industry is in a very interesting place right now. There's last year we worked through a blueprint of identifying the greatest challenges that we face in our industry, and then a plan or blueprint, we call it blueprint, as how those can be addressed from an advocacy perspective, because the restoration industry has lacked voice. It's lacked a cohesive ability to speak as a whole. You have all these different voices in the industry, some of which don't have the interest of the restoration contractor speaking on their behalf. And we believe that needs to change. We believe restorers need to speak for restorers. We don't need a TPA. Sorry, Dan. We don't need a TPA speaking for restoration companies. We need restoration companies speaking for restoration companies. We don't need third-party consultants speaking for restoration companies. We need restoration companies speaking for restoration companies. And so we have been very focused on the implementation of that strategy, and then COVID-19 happened. But some of the seeds we had sown last year and the year before started to bear fruit. And one of those things was, and I think this is one of the greatest benefits to our industry, is that last year RIA and ISCRC formed a collaboration and partnership to work together. Instead of working against each other and trying to do things in our silos, we said, hey, this is silly. We need to identify the areas that ISCRC does things really well for the industry, and then the areas that RIA does things well. And we work together on this. And that was a tough process. I mean, there was decades of animus kind of that came into that process as we worked through that over about a 1 year period of time. But thankfully, we were able to get that agreement put in place last spring. And I'm so thankful that happened, because in this crisis, that foundation that was laid through that process immediately bore fruit as we were able to get out to the industry in incredible, unprecedented speed, best practices, guidelines, and reports and information to the restoration industry about how to handle this crisis. And that has helped the industry. I mean, I get people emailing me constantly talking about how useful that has been in their business. And I can confidently say there is no way that ever would have happened had those pieces not been put into play before. Again, on the communication front, one of the things that we're doing there is we have an industry briefing every 2 weeks for the industry, and that is allowing us to communicate all these important things. And so kind of more of the same there, but incredible times certainly to be in.
That's you got a lot on your plate, Marc. So that
it's an adventure right now.
I appreciate. I think we can all agree that if we could get the governor of the state to tell us that we're not an essential service, we're a critical service, I think we would all be saying, would you be okay if I quoted you on that and perhaps took out the front page of every newspaper in the state? So,
no.
And so I want to get right into questions, because we don't have a lot of time, and it's very rare that we get all three of you gentlemen together. So what I'm going to try to challenge us to do is to try to keep the Q&A responses to ideally about a minute, because I want to get as many questions in as possible because they're kind of piling up right now. So just a reminder to the audience, if you have a question, throw it in there and we will do our best to get to it. So right off the bat, I want to go back to Dan. So Dan, we're gonna cue this up to you, and we'll float around. But Dan, you alluded to how important it is about kind of the self-leadership side. And so we're thinking about how you as a leader, I mean, you have to stay healthy. You have to, maintain, personal, mental, physical health. And a lot of us are, when you talk to someone, they say, what do you miss about the pre-COVID world? A lot of us are saying, I miss my routine. And so just this is a very simple question, Dan, but and I'll pose it to Rich and over to Mark, but what does your morning routine look like? Like, how are you staying sharp as a leader? What are you doing to come to your day as a leader to make sure that you're on your A game?
I was laughing because anyone who knows me knows that I am definitely not a gym guy. I didn't have a routine, a physical activity routine per se. My activity has always been work. I really enjoy what I do. But I will tell you, the one thing that I've adopted in my life differently with what's going on, and I've done this with my 9-year-old daughter and my wife, is actually incorporating once a day, we actually sit and we meditate. It sounds crazy. Some people do it, some people don't. We do it for about a half an hour every day in the evening. And really for us, it was a way of, just being present. And that actually led to me starting a workout regimen, which I started, this month, which has been really great as well. And getting, my wife and really getting into that kind of routine that before we just felt like we didn't have the time for. One thing that Phil said as I was watching the first session this morning was that this is a time, not just, professionally, but personally, where you kind of have a pause. This sort of downtime, if you will, although it's not really downtime for many of us, it's been busier than ever. I have more to do now than ever before, but it really is a moment for us to be able to kind of recalibrate all the things we wanted to do. And so that's sort of the way that I'm taking it. And so every morning, I sort of start with that, kind of recalibrate my priorities and not worry so much about doing everything, like I said before, by the book, by what you're supposed to do, but rather what I feel is, taking top priority today. So that's kind of the way I've been personally handling this.
Yeah, well said, Dan. Rich, tell us, for you to come to work ready to rock and roll, tell us a little bit about your morning. Like, how do you manage your mornings? What does your personal routine look like these days? Oh, you're on mute, Rich. Sorry.
What I aspire to do, I call it bed to bike. I've got a Peloton, and I've got so if it's raining out, I'll get on the Peloton. If it's not raining out, I'll get on my bike. I don't do it every day if I'm sore or whatever. But I guess what I miss, I want to go back. I miss traveling, to be honest. I used to travel 60% of the time to go see our offices, to go see insurance companies, to go to conferences, that kind of stuff. And being here for the last 6 weeks has been tough. So on the family side, I've got 3 boys and they're older, and we sprayed a pickleball court in our driveway. And whenever it's nice out at like around 5 or 6 o'clock, we play pickleball, and we have a lot of fun. It's a little bit of exercise, but it's also a lot of fun. And then mentally, I get on the phone with people I haven't talked to in a while to see how they're doing, like good relationships that I wouldn't normally have called. Whether they're college friends, whether it's a franchise owner, whether it's just somebody that I've lost touch with. So that kind of helps me, and everyone's willing to pick up the phone now. So and that kind of helps me mentally settle, if you will.
Yeah. No, thanks for sharing that, Rich. Over to you, Mark. Mark, tell us, you have to stay healthy as a leader in both these roles. Tell us what your morning looks like. And could you tell us some insights, Mark, in terms of how you are actually just, maintaining your own personal health as a leader?
Yeah. So you said that I have a lot on my plate. Leighton, you have I have 5 daughters aging 19 down to 3. So I've got a lot more there. That's, RIA stuff in Dayspring, that's a walk in the park compared to that. But, every single morning I feel, if I'm being totally honest, I feel totally ill-equipped, and I feel totally out of my league to be able to do what I have on my plate on any given day. And so I absolutely in this time 100% commit my day every single morning in prayer to God, just to give me the strength, to give me the courage, to give me the wisdom, to give me the insight that I'm going to need to get through that day. Because by myself, I don't have a chance, you know. So along the same lines as Dan, it's prayer and meditation to start every day. You know, and I'm just clinging to that every step of the way as I go through. The next routine that I have is one of prioritization. I mean, I joke around with people with so many things happening right now. I just try to disappoint the fewest amount of people every day. I've already disappointed Dan. I still owe him a phone call from like 3 weeks ago. So I prioritize, because in any given day, I know this, it's impossible that I could get to what I want to get to. So I break my things down. I got 3 spheres. I got the Dayspring sphere, the RIA sphere, and then my family sphere. And I identify which are the biggest priorities for that, and how am I going to bite this elephant today? There's more big pieces for that than I could ever get through. But I just want to be, you know, faithful in the things that I have there to make the biggest impact for the most amount of people, and work from that list. And then at the end of the day, I review that and I go, man, I didn't get anywhere near what I hoped to, but we did move the needle. And that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah, well said. Well said, Marc. Another question. So thanks, Jeremiah, for that question. A question from David, and I think why don't we go first to you, Rich, and then we'll go to Dan and back to you, Marc. But as a leader, oftentimes it falls to you to be the encourager, and so I'm curious just what you're doing to encourage your team and your staff and the leaders who lead your leaders. Rich, what are you doing?
So I absolutely agree with that, and that's to be genuine when you give somebody a compliment, and maybe I'm a little older, so I don't give compliments by email too often. I just pick up the phone and say, wow, that program or that process that you created on disinfecting, that was fantastic. So I pick up the phone to encourage. And in terms of my executive team, you know, the people that report directly to me, I give them all the responsibility that they can handle, and encourage them, and do my best to coach them where I can. And I think, you know, it's an overused word, but empowerment. I want them to feel like, you know, they've got their team, they've got my support. And I'm not going to bite their head off if they make a mistake or make a wrong decision. So that would be my encouragement, just engagement, just like I said earlier.
No, thanks, Rich. Dan, I want to go to you with the same question before we go to a new question, and we'll start with Marc for that new question. But Dan, you're the one who said, I really like to be honest with my team. And so I'm curious for you, Dan, what does you encouraging your team look like these days?
Well, we are a small and nimble team. We're growing, but we are very nimble, which is something that could not have been more true when this started. You know, we realized how being small and nimble was really to our advantage. I think the biggest thing was empowering people to lead, giving them as Rich said, giving them the space to make mistakes and just do it, get it done. You know, we can't as leaders. I really love what Marc said about making the list of the fewest number of people I can disappoint today. Because I literally go to bed every night telling my wife, you know, I need to get back to this person and that person, and I need to call this person back, and it sort of it adds up, you know, kind of in your to-do list, and there's a guilt that goes with that, you know. What I realize is that, you know, I'm only one person, and there's only so many hours in a day, and until someone has cracked open the 40-hour day, which no one has yet, you know, I really told the team, you know, I'm empowering you to be me. Not in every situation, obviously, because, you know, we have to keep some controls on certain things, but for the most part, giving people the autonomy to just, you know, act on behalf of the company in a very different way than they would have maybe thought to before. And I actually had a check-in call with my team last week and said, I just want to make sure that you feel empowered. And a couple of them said, oh, absolutely. No, we definitely feel like we have the ability to move the needle, as Marc said, more now than we ever did before. So that's a great feeling.
I appreciate that perspective. Thanks for sharing that, Dan. Marc, I want to go to you with a third question, and I guess I would describe it as more of an operational question, but it is a good question that relates to leadership. What could you tell us about what you're seeing, Marc, in terms of how this pandemic is impacting the supply chain across the industry, the supply chain that we all rely on to just kind of keep things moving? What would be your comment on that, Marc?
So, I mean, the supply chain absolutely has been impacted, fortunately, only in a couple areas. Obviously, PPE has been impacted dramatically. And then also the availability of disinfectants have been impacted. Now, I think there could be some other impacts to the supply chain that we haven't seen yet because production impacts have maybe not been seen yet because the demand isn't there quite yet. How the impact of oil, people paying people to take oil off their hands, how that actually affects plastics and transportation, a lot of stuff. I think some of those things remain to be seen. I think as leaders, we're going to have to make sure we are equipping ourselves with the information to find those leading indicators for those things. The good news that I hear about the disinfectants specifically is that everyone's ramped up production. We're going to see a lot more production. So that in the long term probably isn't going to be a major challenge. PPE is an interesting one because, as restorers, we face some unique challenges with our teams as we send them into sometimes some of the most dangerous places, aside from maybe being working in a critical care area in a hospital, we go into some really difficult places. So PPE procedures and processes is really, really critical. And I think that restorers are going to have to look at and find ways that they can perhaps be creative with this. There's some ways that I think our industry is responding to reusing and repurposing PPE that typically we immediately discarded. We discard it every single day to use it and get a longer useful life out of those things. And I think that's going to be some things we're going to have to really look carefully at if we're going to get through this with still the bias toward protecting our teams.
No, that's well said, Marc. Rich, is there anything that you would like to add to that in terms of anything that you're seeing from a supply chain perspective? Rich, you have a broad network of offices, and I'm just curious about what you're hearing. You've got an ear to the ground. What are you hearing, Rich, on the supply chain side?
Well, first of all, I want to say that I agree with everything that Marc said about looking into maybe some new ideas to conserve and still be safe. So I agree with Marc on that. Again, I'm going to go to relationships. I value our vendors as much as I value our customers and our employees and our subcontractors. The first people I called when we realized, I'm not sure when it was, February 26th or March 2nd, whenever it was, we're like, this is going to be a big deal. I called all my contacts, most of them CEOs at all of our vendors, because I make a point to try to at least 2 or 3 times a year touch base with them. So, and we gobbled up as much as we could. And by the way, I mean, even though with the relationship, we still had trouble fulfilling all of our orders, and we're still worried about it. But I just think having a good relationship with vendors and not jumping from RFP to RFP and sticking with a little loyalty to a certain vendor, I think is important. So that would be my answer to that.
No, thanks for that, Rich. Dan, I want to go to you with a new question, and I want to give each panelist an opportunity to respond. It's a great question from Water Damage Daily, and the question is what is the biggest opportunity, Dan, that COVID has introduced into the industry and into your business? So over to you, Dan.
I would say embracing I see this sort of twofold rather. For us personally at Core, it's been incredibly advantageous because while we're a very unique model, like I said, we ultimately partner with existing successful companies And those companies oftentimes, don't necessarily see the need to be a part of a national group or a national network. I think that COVID for us has certainly opened that up to their realization that being a part of something bigger has is incredibly advantageous for them and frankly needed, especially at times like this. For us internally, it's been embracing technology. So partnerships with 3D imagery companies like Metaport and others have been really, really important to us. And frankly, going proactively to our insurance clients and talking to them about how we could maybe be a solution to them or offer some level of support to them in situations where they don't want to send their staff into homes. I mean, our restorers are going into these properties already, assuming that homeowners are allowing them in. They're going into these properties already. So if we can equip them with technology that allows them to be the eyes and ears of that carrier before they go into these homes, what better way to really take this on? And so that's proved to be pretty successful for us. And I think that we're just seeing the beginning of it. I think that this is, I know we've all heard this, depending on, which news you pay attention to, we've all heard that this is going to be the sort of pre-COVID, post-COVID world. I mean, I think that forcing the entire world to be at home, as it has really created, personal and professional paradigms for all of us. And I think that this may, quite frankly, be the start of new ways of doing business in our industry that are just going to stick from here on out, regardless of the fact that, this pandemic will go, because it will go away and we will be back to life as normal. But I think our life as normal is going to be very different. So we are being very cognizant of the things that we're doing now and trying to figure out what works, what doesn't work, and then bringing those to our clients and saying, hey, this could be potentially your reality going forward. And depending on the client, some are more progressive thinking than others. They're actually willing to adopt these kind of new ways of doing business, which is pretty exciting.
Great, thanks, Dan. I want to go to you, Marc, and just to build on something that Dan said. Dan said, this pandemic is showing the value of being connected. And one of the things that actually each of our panelists has in common is that they represent different levels of connection. Marc, to you, you're also leading in the RIA. For all of our viewers, if you haven't had a chance to, put into your browser, into your search, put into Google, RIA, Our Greatest Need article, Marc Springer. And Marc wrote a great piece. Marc, over to you. I'm curious, what opportunities are you seeing coming out of this whole COVID pandemic? And if you could add to that, just maybe curious your perspective to build on what Dan said and the value of being connected. Particularly, you have an angle through RIA.
Yeah. So I'll just build a little bit off of what Dan said, something that we talked about with our business development team yesterday. An interesting piece of information or data that I heard earlier this week is that, and no one was prepared for this, no one expected it, but the amount of traffic on the cellular networks increased for voice by 2 times the highest Mother's Day in over the last hit. So every day there's 2 times the traffic on the cellular networks that you would have on the highest Mother's Day in the last 5 years. So while everyone is disconnected and we're on all these Zoom calls and all this other stuff, people are reaching out and talking to people and wanting to connect with people in ways that are unexpected. And what I challenged our business development team with was, in the context of that, one of the things that was really interesting is that people who do like telemarketing and who do customer service have said, and we can't get through what we get, the normal work that we do, is we're like calling as a telemarketer people's homes, and people are picking up the phone and they want to talk to us and they want to like tell us all their problems. And so, this aspect of human connection is critical. And I believe one of the greatest opportunities our business development team has right now is to forge and build new relationships that otherwise they may never have had before. And when I brought this up to the team, they said, that is so true. Like when I talked to this person, I talked to the CSR at this insurance agency who normally would give me like 2 minutes. We talked for 30 minutes. For the first time that we had a 30-minute discussion. So this is an area we can forge relationships now unlike ever before. That would be one of the first things I see as an opportunity. The second was that I see from my vantage point is the emphasis on public health. We have had as restorers knock down drag amounts with insurance adjusters over putting an air scrubber in a property to protect our client or to apply disinfectant, or should we not have personal protective equipment for this particular project? You know what? Those conversations, boom, gone. We're not even having that discussion now because the customer has the right to be protected. If we're working in their home, they need to be protected. And having this paradigm shift to protecting the consumer and making sure that they're safe in the context of the restoration that's happening in their home is I think, a game changer. And I think that it ultimately will result in a better end product for the consumer.
Excellent. Yeah, thanks. Thanks for that perspective, Marc. Rich, I want to give you an opportunity. I want to get a few more questions in, but Rich, I'm curious, what is your perspective on some of the biggest opportunities that COVID has introduced to the industry?
Well, first of all, I think both Dan and Marc hit it on the head, and actually, in getting your prep here, I think I wrote all of that down. So I couldn't agree more. That technology is going to become more important and faster, right? Adoption of 3D technology will likely be faster. And in terms of the standard, it really does differ on PPE and disinfecting and all that kind of stuff. It differentiates this industry from your basic Stanley steamer, run-of-the-mill maintenance people. So that gives us an opportunity to build relationships in the future. And again, Marc also said the relationships are going to be deeper and people are going to pick up the phone. I didn't know that stat, Marc. That's pretty good. I don't have a lot more to add other than talent, retention, and acquisition. When you go through a crisis, you really get to see how people respond. And there's a lot of good conflict, which I think conflict's actually good, and good coaching. And there'll likely be opportunities to develop people and also maybe to recruit some people that can really help the organization and the industry out. So that's all I have to add, really.
Well, I appreciate that, Rich. Rich, so let's stay with you for this next question.
Sure.
And a question comes from Daniel. I think it's a really great question. Legal implications. So he has a question around, as we've started to see a ramp up in business around disinfection and cleaning. I'm curious how you think restorers will be affected once the virus settles. And whether or not there'll be, any unforeseen legal implications that may broadside the industry.
From a liability standpoint, you mean, in terms of?
I think what they're referring to is from a liability standpoint. And so, for example, I think people are saying, well, I'm paying you to come in and provide a COVID-free service, and so there's a liability thing there.
Yep. And I don't know that I have the perfect answer for that. I'm fortunate enough to have a general counsel and actually one other lawyer that works with me on payroll. Plus, we have outside counsel. And I think the most important thing here is that when we sign a contract to disinfect, we write all the language to make sure it's clear that we're going to do this, and that. For this amount of money, but at the end of the day, we cannot guarantee that somebody will not get the virus after we're done. So it's going to be, from a business development standpoint or a sales standpoint, we have to make expectations very clear because we do want to set them accurately and honestly. And there's got to be language in there that releases us from any liability of future disease. But again, we've just only been talking about this for probably 5 weeks. And when we're signing new contracts right now, I'm sorry to interrupt. When we're signing new contracts right now, we're on version 3.0. We've gone through 3 versions, and we've signed a bunch of contracts, and we're just trying to, get the best practices. And we haven't been, it's only been 4 or 5 weeks. We haven't been hit with liability yet, but it's a great question, and it's not an important one because. I'd walk away from it if we were completely liable. for anybody that got the disease, there's no way we're doing that.
Yeah.
Even though we can.
Yeah, no, thanks, Rich. And I know there could be more to be said from other panelists. There's a few more questions I want to get in before we shift. We want to have a little bit of a transition so people can top up their coffees. But another question that came in, and I think it's a great question, and is as a leader, and let's start with you, Marc, and we'll go to Dan and back to you, Rich. But as a leader, you have this difficult decision to make where you have to keep revenue coming in the door, and yet we're an industry that's delivered by hands and feet. It's a human business, and so there's also the risk where you have to navigate the risk to potentially your staff. Marc, how are you wrestling with that? And then over to you, Dan, and Rich. Be interested to get your perspective as well.
Yeah, I mean the risk that we're in right now is in many ways unprecedented, but not totally unusual. That as much concern as we have about COVID, we also have sent people for years into sewage backflows where there's all sorts of gram-negative bacteria, E. coli, hepatitis, all sorts of risks, some of which concern me personally more than COVID concerns me. So the area of risk and risk assessment, really, really important. To the previous question, one thing I think that is really important on that front for those of us who are not fortunate to have corporate counsel like Rich does. Rich, we're envious, but thank you for that. Ed Cross at edcross.com has a contract that is available specifically for this, and I would highly encourage any restorer should not be doing any COVID work without a properly drafted contract specific to this. I'm going to say that as an RIA statement almost right here. You just should not be doing it without looking at that liability. As to the risk with your teams, that also is an important area of focus. And I think, this is something that every company has to make sure that their processes now are really increased and in many ways more precise than they were previously. We found, we've been doing mold remediation and, biohazard cleanup for decades. And we realized we had some deficiencies in our PPE processes, frankly. And so we got on our LMS program and we put videos up for donning and doffing PPE, and we had check sheets and checkoffs and everything to make sure that our level of really responsibility that we have to our teams, we're being good stewards of that in the way that we equip them to do this work, because it's unprecedented stuff we're sending them into, and we got to be willing to do it too. I actually donned all the PPE myself and went out and worked with the teams on some COVID jobs because I wanted them to know I'm not going to ask you to do something I wouldn't do too. And so I'm willing to jump into this as well. And I didn't spend a bunch of time doing that, but I did spend some time out with the teams, and I think it's important for them to know if I'm asking you to do this, I'd do it too.
Yeah, thanks, Marc. Dan, I'd like to get your perspective. The same question. How are you balancing as a leader that important balance of keeping revenue coming in the door, and yet you have staff, and in part of your network you have staff that really may have questions about the risk of this virus.
So we've sort of tackled this in layers. I think that when I remember the last trip I took, because like Rich, I traveled a lot, and I remember the last trip I took when this was just about starting. And I was back to my, where I'm from. I live in Austin today, but I'm from the San Francisco Bay Area. And I remember flying home to see my dad and was flying back to Austin and watching people with masks more than normal. Once in a while you see a couple of people with a mask on a plane and you think, oh, maybe they're immunocompromised, maybe, they've, whatever. But I was seeing more of it. And I remember coming back home and saying to my wife, like, something's up, something's happening. I don't know what that is, but I just want to pay attention to it. So I remember going to work that following Monday and talking to my team at our Austin office and saying, you know what, I'm going to follow my gut here, but I think we're going to start working from home. And we're already a bit of a virtual company as it was. And I said, I want everyone to be remote based until I say otherwise. And so we immediately made sure everyone could be home. So we've actually been self-quarantined, guys, since end of January. We immediately decided that if we were going to get through whatever this was, we were going to start very early. So this, for us, we've had it up to here. being home has just been way too long. But that was the first thing, was making sure that our team was secure. The second thing is we looked to the RIA. Mark, unbeknownst to Mark, we immediately contacted Ed Cross and said, we want to understand about this contract that you've got. We'd like to get it in the hands of our contractors. We had a very good conversation with Ed about the importance of that. And then a step further on our claims management front, we actually put together a brand new protocol where our intake people would then ask questions about the homeowner's current health and well-being. Do you have anyone in the home sick? And really documenting that and putting that into the file as just another measure. And so not only are we equipping our contractors with that, the legalese, because of course, we live in America, guys. This is a country that's very litigious, even when it doesn't need to be. And so while you have to think about that and understand that, there's going to be a ripple effect after this from a legal perspective, we also have to be smart about it. And if we're going to be sending contractors into homes where there are people who could potentially be sick, then we have to put those measures in place. Now, the scary thing about COVID is that none of us actually have the answer. And that's kind of the problem, is no one seems to have the answer as to how bad or how not bad this is. And there are so many conflicting bits of information that you kind of, like I said very early in this call, you kind of have to lead with your gut. And I'm sure Rich and Mark have done exactly that you really have to go, what feels right? Because I think that, you need to sort of self-assess that, because I talk to people every day. Some people who say it's a big hoax. Some people say, oh my gosh, it's worse than we could ever imagine. And then you've got everyone else who's kind of in between. And so because we don't really know how bad it is or it will get, because it remains to be seen. We could be at the beginning of this. We don't know. It's important that we as a company put those measures in place to ensure that we had the least amount of negative impact on our business.
Excellent. Guys, this has been fantastic. I have one final question. I want to start with you, Rich, and this is from Stephanie. And I think it's a great question because, Rich, one of those key points when you talked about the 4 things that you're doing at the outset, one was, how do we have fun? And so Stephanie asked a question, which is, and I really just want to give everybody just kind of rocket fire round to respond to it. But as much as you're a leader, you're also a person. What's the number one activity outside of work that just kind of keeps you on your game? Rich?
So me personally, not my company. That you're like, what's fun? Me. Okay. I ride dirt bikes.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm not, unless I crash into a tree and somebody comes by me, generally I'm not within 6 feet of anybody. So I love dirt bikes. Yeah.
Excellent. What about you, Mark? Before I come to you, Dan, Mark, what do you do, outside of work, just to recharge the human and disconnect?
So lately, this wouldn't normally be the case for me. Normally, I do a lot of, we live in Montana, big, wide open spaces. Almost everyone in Montana owns guns, so I do a lot of competitive shooting. But lately, I've not been able to do that because on top of the daughters and the RA and the work and everything, we've been putting an addition on our house. And so I go home at night and I install trim, or I do masonry work. I do all these they're very kind of cathartic projects, where I get this thinking time, putting up stone or putting up trim, whatever it is. And so that's been the thing that has been, there's not many contractors that are just out there and available right now. So that's been my project for the last few months.
Excellent. Yeah, I can see that. Definitely each of you kind of have those cathartic ways of just disconnecting. So yep. That's fantastic. Well, I want to thank you, Rich and Dan and Mark, for your time and your wisdom. I want to thank our participants. We had some excellent questions. I apologize if we weren't able to get to your questions.